Sometimes the peace we seek in our later years isn't meant to last. Sometimes the past finds us, no matter how far we run. Ramsey Coyle was 58 when she left her old life behind and moved deep into the Oregon wilderness with her dog, Knox. She wanted quiet. She wanted to be alone. But one afternoon, while cutting firewood, she found two horses standing on an empty trail. They were saddled but riderless, nervous and afraid. Ramsey calmed them and checked their gear. Someone had been riding these animals recently. Then Knox caught a scent and ran into the trees. What he found changed everything. It wasn't just an accident. It was something that would pull Ramsey back into a world she thought she'd escaped. What was hidden in those mountains? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat in a clearing where the ponderosa pines, thin just enough to let the morning sun reach the porch. Ramsey had built that porch herself 2 years ago, right after she bought the land. 20 acres of Oregon backcountry, far enough from Pinewood that she couldn't see another light at night, close enough that she could make the supply run when she needed to. It was exactly what she wanted. She stood there now, coffee in hand, watching Knox nose through the woodpile. The German Shepherd was 7 years old, gray starting to show around his muzzle, but he moved with the same energy he'd had as a pup. He'd been with her through the last 5 years of her guiding career, back when she was still leading groups of tourists through the Cascade Trails, teaching them how to read the landscape, how to respect the wilderness. That felt like a different life now. The coffee was strong and bitter, the way she liked it. She'd learned to make it that way from her father, who'd spent more time in these mountains than he ever had at home. Malcolm Coyle had been a surveyor by trade, but his real passion was exploration. He'd disappear for weeks at a time, coming back with stories about hidden valleys and forgotten trails, his boots caked with mud and his eyes bright with whatever he'd discovered. Ramsey had inherited his restlessness. She'd spent 30 years guiding, first with her father, then on her own after he'd taught her everything he knew. She could read a topographic map in her sleep, could identify trees by their bark alone, could tell you which direction water would flow just by looking at the lay of the land. Those skills had kept her employed, respected, and constantly in motion, until 2 years ago. Her father had died on a trail not far from here. Heart attack, the coroner said. He was 73, and he'd been hiking alone, which he'd done 1,000 times before. They found him sitting against a tree, his pack beside him, looking for all the world like he'd just stopped to rest. Peaceful, they said. Quick Dot Ramsey didn't believe in peaceful deaths, not really. She believed in the moment before, when you knew something was wrong, when your body betrayed you, and there was nothing you could do about it. She believed in the fear that came with that knowledge, no matter how brief. She'd scattered his ashes in these mountains, in a dozen different places he'd loved. And then she'd quit guiding, bought this land, and built her cabin. The cabin was small but well made. One main room with a wood stove, a loft for sleeping, a separate shed for tools and supplies. She designed it for simplicity, for self-sufficiency. Solar panels on the roof, a well she drilled herself, a root cellar dug into the hillside. She could go months without seeing another person if she wanted to. And mostly, she wanted to. Knox barked once, sharp and attention-seeking. Ramsey set down her coffee and walked over to where he was digging near the woodpile. "What have you got?" He looked up at her, tail wagging, then went back to pawing at the ground. "Probably a vole. He'd been catching them all summer, leaving them on the porch like gifts." She appreciated the sentiment, even if she didn't appreciate the cleanup. "Leave it," she said. And he did, reluctantly, trotting back to her side. Inside the cabin, on a shelf above her father's old desk, sat the things she'd kept from his surveying work. A brass compass with his initials engraved on the back. A slide rule he'd used before calculators made them obsolete. A collection of field notebooks, their pages filled with measurements and sketches and observations written in his cramped, careful handwriting, and a map. The map was old. The paper yellowed and soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. It showed this region of Oregon back when it had been less thoroughly explored. Her father had marked it up over the years, adding notes in pencil, circling areas of interest, drawing X's in places that meant something only to him. Ramsey had looked at that map more times than she could count, trying to understand what had driven him to spend so much time out here, trying to understand why he'd kept so much of his work secret. Even from her. There were places on the map marked with names she didn't recognize. Pitchstone was one of them, circled multiple times, with lines drawn out to other notations. Old wagon road, collapsed mine shaft, foundations. She'd asked him about it once, years ago, and he'd waved her off. Ghost stories, he'd said. Nothing worth your time. But he'd kept going back. The morning sun was climbing higher now, warming the air. Ramsey finished her coffee and rinsed the cup, then pulled on her boots. She had firewood to cut. The wood stove kept the cabin warm through the winter, and winter came early this high up. She'd learned to stay ahead of it, to work through the summer and fall so she'd have enough split and stacked before the first snow. She grabbed her axe from the shed, along with a canteen and a pair of work gloves. Knox followed her out, ranging ahead as they walked into the trees. She'd scouted a stand of dead ponderosa about a mile north. Good dry wood that would burn clean. It would take her most of the day to cut it and haul it back, but she didn't mind. The work kept her hands busy and her mind quiet. That's what she'd come out here for. Quiet. She thought about her father as she walked, the way she often did. Thought about the last time she'd seen him, 3 weeks before he died. He'd stopped by her apartment in Bend, looking tired but determined. They'd shared a meal, talked about nothing important, and then he'd left. She hadn't known it was goodbye. There were things she wished she'd asked him. Things about his work, about his obsessions, about what he'd really been looking for in these mountains. But she'd been busy with her own life, her own career, and she'd assumed there would be more time. There was never enough time. Knox stopped suddenly, ears up, body tense. Ramsey paused, following his gaze. At first, she didn't see anything unusual. Just trees, undergrowth, the play of light through the canopy. Then movement, something large, dark, shifting between the trunks. Not a bear. Wrong shape, wrong movement. Horses, 2 of them, standing on what looked like an old trail she hadn't used in months. They were saddled, their reins hanging loose, and they looked nervous. One of them stamped and snorted, head tossing. Ramsey approached slowly, speaking low and calm. Easy now, easy. The horses watched her, but didn't bolt. As she got closer, she could see they were well cared for, their coats clean, their tack in good condition. These weren't wild horses or strays from some distant ranch. These animals belonged to someone, and that someone had been riding them recently. She reached the first horse, a bay mare, and took hold of the reins. The mare calmed at her touch, leaning into her hand when she stroked the animal's neck. The second horse, a gray gelding, stayed close. Both saddles showed signs of recent use. The leather was warm, the stirrups adjusted for a rider of average height. There were saddlebags on the mare, bulging with supplies. Ramsey's mind worked through the possibilities. Rider's thrown, maybe. An accident. But both horses? At the same time? And neither animal showed signs of panic. No scrapes or wounds that would indicate a fall or a struggle. She checked the saddlebags on the mare, opening the flap. Inside, a water bottle, energy bars, a first aid kit, and a folded piece of paper. She pulled out the paper and unfolded it. A hiking permit issued by the Deschutes National Forest Service. Solo expedition, 3-day duration, dated 3 days ago. The name on the permit read J. Feldman, with an address in Portland. Knox had wandered off while she was examining the horses. Now he barked, once sharp and insistent. Ramsey looked up and saw him standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into the trees. Knox. Here. He didn't come. He barked again, then disappeared into the undergrowth. Ramsey tied the horses to a sturdy pine, making sure they had enough lead to move comfortably, then followed her dog into the trees. The undergrowth was thick here, and she had to push through branches and navigate around fallen logs. Knox's barking had stopped, but she could hear him moving ahead, his paws crunching through dry needles. She found him in a small clearing, maybe 50 yards from where she'd left the horses. He was standing over something, tail low, body tense, a piece of fabric, torn, streaked with something dark. Blood. Ramsey picked it up carefully, examining it. The fabric was synthetic, probably from a hiking jacket. The blood was dry, but not old, maybe a day or two. Not much of it, but enough to tell her that someone had been hurt. She looked around the clearing, reading the signs. Disturbed earth, broken branches, the faint impression of boot prints in the soft ground. Someone had been here. Someone had left in a hurry, and they left their horses behind. Knox whined, looking up at her with those dark, intelligent eyes. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, thinking, this wasn't her problem. She could take the horses back to Pinewood, report what she'd found, let the authorities handle it. That would be the sensible thing to do. But the permit had been issued 3 days ago. If Jay Feldman was hurt, if they were out here alone and injured, 3 days could mean the difference between life and death. She thought about her father, dying alone on a trail not far from here. She thought about all the times she'd lectured her clients about safety, about the importance of not hiking alone, about telling someone where you were going. She couldn't just walk away. All right, she said to Knox. Let's see what we can find. Ramsey went back for the horses. If she was going to track this missing hiker, she'd need them. The Mari and gelding followed her willingly enough, their training evident in how they responded to her voice and touch. She led them back to her cabin, unsaddled them, and put them in the small corral she'd built for the pack mule she no longer owned. Knox waited by the cabin door, restless and alert. He knew something was happening, could sense the shift in her routine. Inside, Ramsey gathered supplies. Her own pack, lighter than what she'd carried during her guiding days, but equipped for emergencies. First aid kit, water purification tablets, rope, a knife, matches, emergency blanket. She added a handheld radio, though she doubted it would pick up much out here. The nearest repeater was 20 miles away. She also took her father's compass. It was habit more than necessity. She had a GPS unit that was more reliable, but the weight of it in her pocket felt right. Before leaving, she examined the saddlebag from the Mare more carefully. Besides the permit and basic supplies, she found a wallet, Oregon driver's license, Julian Feldman, age 42, Portland address matching the permit. The photo showed a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a cautious smile. There was also a phone, dead. She'd try to charge it later, see if there was anything useful on it. The torn fabric and blood had been northwest of where she'd found the horses. Ramsey headed that direction, Knox ranging ahead but staying close. The forest was quiet, just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the occasional call of a jay. She found the clearing, again within 15 minutes. In daylight, with time to examine it properly, she could see more details. The boot prints were distinct enough to track men's hiking boots, size 10 or 11, with an aggressive tread pattern. They led away from the clearing, deeper into the forest, moving fast based on the spacing and depth of the impressions. Someone running or being chased. She followed the trail for half an hour, Knox beside her, reading the landscape as she went. The prints stayed consistent, never wavering, moving with purpose. Whoever this was, they knew where they were going, or thought they did. The trail led to a depression in the terrain, a natural hollow where water would collect during the spring melt. Now, in late summer, it was dry and choked with undergrowth, and in the center of it, partially hidden by sword ferns, was a tent. Ramsey approached carefully. "Hello? Julian Feldman?" No answer. The tent was a two-person model, good quality, the kind serious backpackers used. One side had collapsed, the poles bent at odd angles. The entrance was partially open, the zipper caught halfway. She knelt beside it, Knox watching the perimeter. "Mr. Feldman?" "My name's Ramsey Coyle. I found your horses." "Are you hurt?" Still no answer. She unzipped the entrance fully and looked inside. Empty. A sleeping bag lay rumpled in one corner, a stuffed sack of clothes in another. A camping stove, fuel canister, freeze-dried meals. Everything you'd expect from a solo backpacking trip, but the tent had been damaged from the outside. The bent poles, the torn fabric near the base. Something or someone had forced their way in or tried to. Ramsey backed away and circled the campsite. More boot prints, multiple sets this time. The original hiker's prints, plus at least two others. Larger, heavier impressions. Man, probably. They'd come from the east, converged on the tent, then scattered. A struggle had happened here. The evidence was clear in the disturbed earth, the broken branches, the way gear had been scattered and then hastily gathered. Knox growled low, a sound that made the hair on Ramsey's neck stand up. She turned and saw him staring into the trees, body rigid. "What is it?" He didn't move, just kept staring. Ramsey followed his gaze but saw nothing, just shadows and undergrowth and the endless repetition of tree trunks. Then, movement. A flicker of something dark, there and gone. Someone was watching them. Ramsey's hand went to the knife on her belt, though she knew it was inadequate if things got dangerous. "Who's there?" The forest swallowed her voice. No response, no movement. She waited, counting her breaths, giving whoever it was a chance to identify themselves. When nothing happened, she made a decision. "Knox, come." They backed away from the campsite, keeping their eyes on the trees, moving slowly until they were clear of the hollow. Then Ramsey turned and walked quickly back the way they'd come, not quite running but moving with purpose. She didn't like this. The abandoned horses, the damaged tent, the watching presence in the trees. This wasn't a simple hiking accident. This was something else, something deliberate. Back at the clearing where she'd first found the horses, she paused to examine the area more thoroughly. She'd missed something before, focused as she'd been on the torn fabric. Now she saw it, another set of prints, distinct from the ones at the campsite. These were fresher, probably made this morning. Someone else was out here, tracking the same trail she was. Ramsey pulled out her radio and tried the emergency channel. Static, then a faint voice, breaking up badly. "Dispatch, go ahead. This is Ramsey Coyle, north of Pinewood. I found evidence of a missing hiker, possibly injured. Julian Feldman, solo permit issued 3 days ago. Requesting assistance." More static. Location. She gave her coordinates as best she could, knowing the signal was too weak for a reliable transmission. The voice on the other end was unintelligible. "I'm going to continue searching," she said. "We'll report back when I have more information." She didn't know if they heard her. The radio crackled once more, then went silent. Knox was watching her, waiting. She looked at him, at the forest around them, at the mountains rising in the distance. Somewhere out there, Julian Feldman was missing, possibly hurt, possibly running from something or someone, and her father's voice echoed in her memory. Something he'd told her years ago when she'd asked him why he spent so much time alone in these mountains. "Because some things are worth protecting," he'd said. "And sometimes the only way to protect them is to know them better than anyone else." She hadn't understood then. She thought she might be starting to understand now. "All right," she told Knox. "Let's find him." The afternoon sun was already shifting toward evening. She had maybe 4 hours of good light left. Ramsey moved back to the damaged campsite. this time searching more methodically. She found a field notebook, partially hidden under a log near the collapsed tent. The cover was weathered, the pages swollen with moisture. She opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was cramped and precise, filled with dates, times, and observations. Hiking notes, mostly. Landmarks, trail conditions, wildlife sightings. But the later entries were different. Less about the hike itself, and more about something else. Day 7. Found the old wagon road, exactly where Coyle said it would be. Hard to believe it's been hidden for so long. The forest has almost reclaimed it completely. Coyle, her father's name. Ramsey's hands tightened on the notebook. She flipped forward, reading quickly. Day 8. Followed the road 3 miles north. Found foundations, just like the story said. This place was real. Pitchstone existed. But why did everyone leave? And why did Coyle spend so much time trying to hide it? Her breath caught. Pitchstone, the name from her father's map, the one he dismissed as ghost stories. The final entry was dated 2 days ago. Day 9. I was wrong to come here. Wrong to dig into this. Coyle was protecting something, and now I've led them right to it. If anyone finds this, I'm sorry. I thought I was just researching history. I didn't know what I was really looking for, or who would care. The entry ended there. The rest of the page blank. Ramsey closed the notebook and looked at Knox. Her father had been protecting something. Something connected to Pitchstone, this ghost town that supposedly didn't exist. And Julian Feldman had somehow gotten caught up in it. The watching presence in the trees made sense now. Whoever they were still out here. Still searching Dodd, and now they knew she was involved. Ramsey didn't sleep much that night. She'd returned to her cabin before dark, securing the horses and bringing Knox inside with her. The field notebook sat on the table, and she'd read through it 3 more times, trying to piece together what Julian Feldman had been searching for and why it had gotten him into trouble. The notebook told a story of obsession. Feldman was a history teacher. That much was clear from his writing style and the academic references scattered throughout. He'd been researching abandoned settlements in Oregon, specifically ghost towns from the mining era of the 1880s. Pitchstone had caught his attention because it appeared in several historical records, but had no confirmed location. Then he'd found her father's name in the archives of the Oregon Historical Society. Malcolm Coyle, surveyor, had filed reports about the region in the 1970s and 80s, but some of those reports had been withdrawn, sealed under requests for privacy that Feldman couldn't legally access. That had made him more curious. He tracked down her father 2 years ago, right before Malcolm died, and they corresponded. Her father had been evasive, according to Feldman's notes, but had eventually agreed to share some information. Not the location of Pitchstone, but hints, landmarks that might lead someone there, if they knew how to read the landscape. Feldman had spent the last 2 years planning this trip, cross-referencing historical documents with topographic maps, waiting for the right season when the trails would be accessible. And he'd found it. Found Pitchstone, or at least the ruins of it. The notebook included sketches, foundations laid out in a rough grid pattern, suggesting maybe 20 or 30 buildings, a larger structure at the center, possibly a general store or meeting hall. And off to one side, partially collapsed but still recognizable, the entrance to a mine shaft. Her father had known exactly where this place was, had visited it, studied it, and then spent decades making sure no one else could find it. Why? Ramsey looked at the map on the wall, the one with her father's notations. The X marking Pitchstone was circled multiple times, with lines radiating out to other marks. Dangerous, one note said. Keep closed, said another. She'd always assumed he was being melodramatic, protecting some personal project or favorite camping spot. Now she wondered if there was something more. Dawn came slowly. Ramsey made coffee and fed Knox. then gathered supplies for a longer expedition. If she was going to find Feldman and understand what was happening, she needed to locate Pitchstone herself. The notebook gave her enough information to start. Feldman had approached from the northeast, following what he'd called the old wagon road. Ramsey knew that area. She'd guided trips through it years ago, but she'd never noticed anything that looked like an old road, which meant her father had hidden it well. She left at first light, Knox at her side, moving with the easy pace of someone who knew how to cover distance without exhausting herself. The forest was beautiful in the early morning, mist rising from the hollows, light filtering golden through the canopy dot. It took her 3 hours to reach the area Feldman had described. She found his trail easily enough. He'd marked trees with small cairns of stones, probably to help himself navigate back out. The wagon road, when she finally spotted it, was barely visible. Just a depression in the terrain, slightly straighter than nature would create. Overgrown with ferns and moss dot, she followed it north, Knox ranging ahead, and after another hour of careful tracking, she found the first artifact, a rusted metal tag, half buried in the roots of an old Douglas fir. She knelt and worked it free, brushing away the dirt. The metal was corroded, but she could still make out the stamped numbers, 47, and below that, partially obscured, PITCH, Pitchstone. This was real. The tag was an identification marker, the kind miners used to keep track of workers or equipment. Holding it felt strange, like touching a piece of history that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. She put the tag in her pocket and continued following the wagon road. The forest felt different here, older somehow. The trees were massive, centuries old, their trunks thick enough that 3 people couldn't encircle them with joined hands. The undergrowth was sparse beneath them, shaded out by the dense canopy. Knox stopped suddenly, ears up. Ramsey froze, listening. Voices, faint, coming from ahead and to the left. She moved off the wagon road, using the trees for cover, and crept forward. Knox stayed close, silent now, his training from their guiding days kicking in. Through the trees, she saw movement. 2 men, both wearing hiking clothes but carrying equipment that seemed wrong for a casual backpacking trip. One had a GPS unit with an external antenna, the kind used for precise surveying. The other was holding what looked like a metal detector. They were searching for something. Ramsey watched from behind a massive cedar, barely breathing. The men moved methodically, sweeping the metal detector in slow arcs while the other checked his GPS and made notes on a tablet. "Should be around here somewhere," one of them was saying. Feldman's notes said. "Forget Feldman's notes," the other interrupted. He didn't know what he was looking at. "We need the original survey data. The old man destroyed most of it." "Not all of it." "There's still." A branch cracked under Ramsey's foot. Both men turned, scanning the trees. She dropped flat, pulling Knox down beside her, holding her breath. One of the men started walking in her direction, his hand moving to something on his belt. Not a flashlight, a pistol. This wasn't a historical society expedition. These men were armed, professional, and searching for whatever her father had tried to hide. The man came within 10 feet of her hiding spot, then stopped. He scanned the area, suspicious but not certain. After a long moment, he turned back to his partner. "Probably just an animal. We need to move faster. If someone else finds this place, no one's finding anything." Coyle made sure of that. And now he's dead, so there's no one left who knows. Except me, Ramsey thought. The men moved on, heading deeper into the forest. Ramsey waited a full 5 minutes after they disappeared from sight, then carefully rose and backed away. Using every skill her father had taught her to move silently, she was a quarter-mile away, before she felt safe enough to breathe normally. Knox looked up at her, sensing her fear and confusion. "It's all right," she whispered, though a WSN single quotes T. Her father hadn't just been protecting a historical site. He'd been protecting it from people like those men. People who carried weapons and GPS units and talked about original survey data as if it were worth killing for. And Julian Feldman had led them right to it. She needed to find him before they did. Ramsey circled wide around the two armed men, using game trails and natural cover to move through the forest undetected. Knox stayed close, his instincts aligned with hers. They'd tracked plenty of wildlife together, but now they were the ones being careful not to leave a trail. The wagon road continued north, and she followed it at a distance, parallel, but never directly on it. Her father had taught her this technique when she was young. Never take the obvious path when you don't know what's ahead. After another mile, the road widened slightly, and she began to see evidence of old construction. Cut stones, too regular to be natural, partially buried in the earth. A rusted iron ring set into a post, the wood around it long since rotted away. These weren't just trails, they were the remnants of a settlement. She moved slowly now, examining everything. The forest had done its work over the decades, reclaiming what humans had built. But the bones of pitchstone were still here if you knew how to look. Knox sniffed at something and pawed the ground. Ramsey knelt beside him and brushed away a layer of pine needles and dirt. Beneath was a flat stone, carved with marks. Not letters exactly, but symbols. Clay markers, she realized. The kind Myers used to denote property boundaries. Her pulse quickened. This was more than just an abandoned town. This had been a mining operation, complete with legal claims and surveyed boundaries. She pulled out Feldman's notebook and cross-referenced his sketches. According to his notes, the main settlement should be another quarter-mile ahead, where the wagon road terminated at a natural clearing. She found it 20 minutes later. The clearing was maybe 2 acres, nestled in a shallow valley where a creek had once run. Now the creek bed was dry, choked with debris, but she could see the shape of it cutting through the middle of the settlement. Foundations everywhere. Stone and timber, collapsed and overgrown, but unmistakable. This had been a real town with real people, and someone had gone to considerable trouble to make sure it was forgotten. Ramsey moved among the ruins carefully, reading the layout. The central building had been large, maybe 30 feet by 40. Store or meeting hall, as she'd guessed. Smaller structures radiated out from it, probably homes or bunkhouses. And at the far end of the clearing, set into the hillside, was the mine entrance. Timber supports framed the opening, weathered but still standing. Someone had sealed it with rocks and earth, but the barrier had partially collapsed. The gap was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Knox whined, unwilling to approach the mine. Ramsey didn't blame him. The opening exhaled cool air that smelled of damp stone and decay. She was about to examine the mine more closely when she heard it, a sound like fabric tearing. Then a muffled curse. Someone was inside one of the collapsed structures. Ramsey moved toward the sound, Knox at her heel. The structure had once been a cabin, she thought. 3 walls were partially standing, and the roof had caved in completely. Through a gap in the timbers, she could see movement. Julian Feldman? She called out. The movement stopped. Then, cautiously, "Who's asking?" "My name is Ramsey Coyle. I found your horses." "Are you hurt?" A pause. "Coyle? As in Malcolm Coyle?" "He was my father." Another pause, longer this time. Then the person inside shifted, and she could see him through the gap. Thin, glasses matching the photo on the driver's license. Julian Feldman. "I need help," he said, and his voice carried the weight of someone who'd been alone and afraid for too long. Ramsey helped him out of the collapsed structure. He was in rough shape, dehydrated, exhausted, with a badly bruised ankle that is swollen to twice its normal size. His jacket was torn, the same fabric she'd found in the clearing days ago. He'd been moving since then, hiding, trying to stay ahead of whoever was after him. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, offering him water. He drank deeply before answering. 4 days. Maybe 5. I lost track. The permit said 3 days. I lied on the permit. I knew I'd need more time. He winced as he tried to shift his weight off the injured ankle. Didn't think I'd need it like this, though. She helped him sit against a standing wall, where he had cover and shade. Knox settled nearby, watching him with curious but wary eyes. "Tell me what happened," Ramsey said. Feldman rubbed his face, his hands shaking slightly. "I'm a teacher. History. I've been researching ghost towns for years, just as a hobby. Pitchstone kept coming up in old records, but no one could verify it existed. Then I found your father's name in some archived surveys." "How did you contact him?" "Through the Historical Society. They had an old address in Bend. I wrote him a letter, not expecting much. But he responded. We exchanged emails for a few months. What did he tell you?" "Not much at first. He was protective of this place. Didn't want me coming out here. But I kept asking, kept showing him my research. Eventually, he gave me some hints. Landmarks, geographical features. Enough that I could find it if I was careful." Ramsey felt a familiar frustration. That sounded like her father, secretive, protective, never giving a straight answer, even when pressed. Why did he care so much? She asked. Feldman looked at her directly. "Because of what's here. Not just the town, but what they found. Your father discovered it in the 70s, I think. That's when he started sealing records, making sure no one could trace the location. What did they find? Silver. High-grade silver, one of the richest veins in Oregon. But the mine was on disputed land, never legally claimed, never properly surveyed. When the settlers realized what they had, they tried to keep it secret, process it quietly, avoid drawing attention. Your father found evidence of the vein in old mining records and confirmed it with his own surveys." Ramsey's mind raced. Silver. That explained the secrecy. The sealed records, the decades of her father's vigilance. "But why not just claim it legally?" she asked. "Because the land was never properly settled. The original miners were essentially squatters. And when violence broke out, fights over the claim, accusations of theft, everyone just disappeared. No legal claims were ever filed. Which means, technically, the silver is still there for the taking. If someone could prove the location and validate the vein, they could file a modern claim and it would probably be honored. And that's what brought you here," Ramsey said, understanding dawning. "You weren't just researching history. You were trying to validate the claim." Feldman had the grace to look ashamed. "I was hired, a land development corporation out of Seattle. They'd heard rumors about Pitchstone and wanted confirmation. They paid me to find it and document everything." Knox growled low. Ramsey felt the same anger rising in her chest. "So you led them right to it." "I didn't know what I was really doing," Feldman said quickly. "I thought it was just historical research, documenting a lost settlement. I didn't realize they wanted the mining claim until I'd already agreed. And by then they owned your research." Ramsey finished. He nodded miserably. The sound of branches breaking made them both freeze. Someone was approaching through the ruins, moving without concern for stealth. The armed men had found Pitchstone. Ramsey grabbed Feldman's arm and pulled him deeper into the collapsed structure. Finding a corner where the remaining walls provided cover, Knox pressed against her leg, silent and alert. Through the gaps in the timber, she could see 2 figures entering the clearing. The same men she'd seen earlier with the GPS and metal detector. They moved with confidence now, no longer searching but arriving. One of them was speaking into a radio. "Confirmed location. The settlement is here, just like the old surveys indicated. We'll need the full team for excavation." The radio crackled a response Ramsey couldn't hear. Feldman's work was accurate. The man continued. "We should have listened to him before he got cold feet." Beside her, Feldman flinched at his name. The men walked through the clearing, examining the ruins with professional interest. The one with the GPS was taking readings, marking waypoints. The other was photographing everything with a high-end camera. "The mine entrance is sealed," one of them said. "We'll need equipment to clear it safely. Corporate wants core samples first. Verify the vein before we commit resources." "And what about Feldman?" "What about him? He's been out here 4 days with no supplies. He's either dead or close to it. Either way, he's not our problem anymore." The words were casual, dismissive. They'd left him to die, Ramsey realized. Or maybe they'd ensured he wouldn't make it back. She looked at Feldman, saw the confirmation in his eyes. These men had come after him when he tried to back out of the arrangement. They'd chased him from his camp, destroyed his equipment, and left him stranded in the wilderness. The men continued their survey of the clearing, moving closer to the collapsed cabin where Ramsey and Feldman were hiding. Knox's body tensed, ready to defend if needed. One of the men paused near the mine entrance. "Someone's been here recently. These rocks have been moved." "Feldman, probably." "Doesn't matter. By tomorrow, we'll have—" A sound from the forest interrupted him. Branches cracking, deliberate and loud. Both men turned, hands moving to their belts. Ramsey realized what was happening a second before Knox did. Another person was approaching, and whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. An older woman emerged from the trees, walking with the slow, measured steps of someone who spent their life in the mountains. She wore canvas pants and a faded work shirt, her gray hair pulled back in a practical braid. She looked at the two men with the expression of someone finding unwanted guests on her property. "You boys lost?" she asked. The men exchanged glances. "This is public land," one of them said. "Public, yes, but not open for commercial excavation without permits." The woman moved closer, and Ramsey could see she carried a walking stick, or what looked like a walking stick but was probably something more useful in a confrontation. "I'm the volunteer wilderness steward for this sector. Want to show me your permits? We're just hiking." "With surveying equipment and a satellite phone?" "Try again." The man with the GPS stepped forward. "Look, ma'am, we don't want any trouble. We're conducting legitimate research." "Into what?" "Forgotten silver mines?" The woman smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "I've been patrolling these mountains for 30 years. I know every ghost town, every abandoned claim, every treasure hunter who thinks they've found something special. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. We have authorization from— I don't care who authorized you. This land is protected wilderness. No commercial activity without federal approval, which takes months to get and requires environmental impact studies. You have those?" The men didn't answer. "That's what I thought." The woman pulled out her own radio. "I'm calling this in. You can explain yourselves to the Forest Service." The man with the pistol moved his hand to his belt. The woman saw it and stopped moving, her expression hardening. "Don't do something you'll regret," she said quietly. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the man slowly raised his hands, showing them empty. "We're leaving," he said. "No trouble. Good choice." The woman kept her radio visible. "And don't come back without proper permits." The men backed away, keeping their eyes on her until they reached the edge of the clearing. Then they turned and disappeared into the forest. Moving quickly, the woman waited until they were gone, then lowered her radio and looked directly at the collapsed cabin where Ramsey was hiding. "You can come out now," she said. Ramsey hesitated, then helped Feldman to his feet and emerged from their hiding spot. Knox stayed close, watching the stranger carefully. The woman looked them over, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "Ramsey Coyle, unless I miss my guess. You look just like your father. You knew Malcolm?" "Knew him? We worked together for 15 years. He trained me as a wilderness steward back in the 90s. The woman extended her hand. "Vivian Price, your father and I spent a lot of time making sure places like this stayed hidden." Ramsey shook her hand, stunned. Her father had never mentioned working with anyone on his surveys. She'd always assumed he worked alone. Why didn't he tell me about you? Because he didn't tell you about a lot of things. Vivian looked at Feldman. You must be the teacher who's been asking questions. Malcolm mentioned you in one of our last conversations. Said you were persistent but well-meaning. Feldman managed a weak smile. I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was getting into. Few people do. Vivian examined his injured ankle, then looked at Ramsey. He needs proper medical attention. And we need to talk about what happens next. Those men will be back, Ramsey said. Oh, I know they will. They've invested too much to walk away now. Vivian straightened, looking around the clearing. But they'll be more careful next time. They'll bring lawyers, permits, maybe even law enforcement if they've managed to bribe the right people. Can they actually claim the mine? Legally? It's complicated. The original settlement was never properly registered, which means the mineral rights are probably still available. But this is protected wilderness now, which limits commercial activity. It would take years of legal battles to sort out. Vivian paused. Unless they can prove immediate ownership through some loophole we haven't thought of. Ramsey thought about her father's sealed records, his decades of secrecy. What aren't you telling me? Vivian was quiet for a moment, then sighed. Your father found something else here. Something besides silver. That's why he worked so hard to keep this place hidden. What did he find? Evidence of what really happened to the people of Pitchstone. Why they left so suddenly, and where some of them went. Vivian looked at the mine entrance. It's inside. He showed me once, made me promise to help protect it if anything happened to him. What is it? The truth. And the truth is worth more than any silver vein. Before Ramsey could respond, Knox barked sharply, staring back the way the armed men had gone. In the distance, she heard engines. Multiple vehicles, getting closer. The men hadn't left. They'd called for reinforcements. We need to move, Vivian said. Now. They moved as quickly as Feldman's injured ankle would allow, Ramsey supporting him on one side while Vivian scouted ahead. Knox ranged between them and the approaching sounds, alert for any sign of pursuit. The engines had stopped, which meant the vehicles had parked somewhere on the old logging road that cut through this sector. Vivian led them away from the clearing, following a route that avoided the obvious trails. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in these mountains, reading the terrain and choosing paths that left minimal trace. How many do you think they brought? Ramsey asked. At least 6, based on what I heard. Maybe more. Vivian glanced back. These aren't casual treasure hunters anymore. That's professional security, the kind corporations hire when they want to secure a location. They reached a rocky outcrop that provided temporary cover. Feldman collapsed against a boulder, breathing hard, his face pale with pain. Ramsey knelt beside him, checking his ankle. The swelling had worsened with the movement. I can't keep going like this, he said. I'm slowing you down. We're not leaving you, Ramsey said firmly. Vivian was scanning the forest below them. There's a ranger station about 5 miles northeast. Abandoned now, but it has a working emergency radio. We can call for help from there. 5 miles? It's our best option. Those men will search the immediate area first, which gives us time. Vivian turned to Ramsey. But we need to decide what we're doing about Pitchstone. If we just call this in, report the men as trespassers, they'll leave and come back with legal authority. Corporate lawyers can make a lot of problems disappear. So, what's the alternative? We show the authorities what your father found. The evidence that changes everything. Vivian paused. But that means going into the mine. Ramsey looked back toward the clearing, now hidden by distance and trees. The mine entrance sealed for decades, holding whatever secret her father had died protecting. Tell me what's down there, she said. Vivian settled against the rocks, keeping watch while she talked. The silver vein is real high-grade ore, probably worth millions if properly extracted. But when your father was surveying the area in the 70s, he found something else in the deeper shafts. Documents, hidden in a sealed chamber. What kind of documents? Letters, journals, legal papers. The original settlers of Pitchstone weren't just miners. They were refugees, families who'd fled violence and persecution in other mining camps. They came here to start over, to build something better. Vivian's voice softened. They succeeded too for a while. Created a genuine community, self-governing, equitable. They shared the silver profits equally, used them to build schools and infrastructure. Feldman was listening now, despite his pain. What happened to them? The mining company found out about the silver, sent representatives to buy them out. When the settlers refused to sell, things got ugly. Intimidation, threats, violence. Several people disappeared. The company claimed they were operating within their legal rights, that the land had never been properly claimed. So the settlers left, Ramsey said. Most of them, yes, but not before documenting everything. Every threat, every act of violence, every attempt to steal their claim. They sealed those documents in the mine, along with proof of their legal claim to the land. Your father found them decades later and realized they were still legally relevant. How? Because the mining company that terrorized them still exists. Merged with other corporations over the years, but the corporate entity is continuous. If those documents were made public, it would prove historical wrongdoing and could invalidate any modern claim they tried to make on this land. Vivian looked at Ramsey. That's why your father kept this place hidden. Not to protect the silver, but to protect the evidence until the right moment came to use it. Ramsey felt the weight of understanding settle over her. Her father hadn't been obsessive or paranoid. He'd been strategic, waiting for the right time to expose the truth. And now that moment has come. She said, yes, but only if we can get to those documents before the corporation does. The sound of voices drifted up from below. The search party was spreading out, moving through the ruins of Pitchstone systematically. They had maybe an hour before the searchers expanded their radius to include this outcrop. Ramsey made her decision. Vivian, get Feldman to the ranger station. Call for help. Report everything. I'll go back to the mine. Get the documents. That's too dangerous alone. I know these mountains. I can move faster by myself, and I can avoid detection. Ramsey looked at Knox. Besides, I won't be completely alone. Vivian studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your father would be proud, and probably furious. She pulled a small waterproof bag from her pack and handed it to Ramsey. You'll need this. The documents are in a sealed chamber, about 200 feet into the main shaft. There's a side passage marked with 3 stones stacked vertically. The chamber is behind a false wall press on the stone with the chisel marked, and it'll pivot open. Ramsey took the bag. How do you know so much detail? Your father took me there once, showed me everything. Made me memorize the location in case something happened to him. Vivian's expression darkened. I always wondered if his death was really an accident. Now I'm certain it wasn't. The possibility that her father had been murdered had been growing in Ramsey's mind since she'd found Feldman. Now, hearing it stated as fact, she felt a cold clarity settle over her anger. I'll make sure these documents get out, she said. Whatever it takes. Vivian gripped her shoulder. Be careful. These people have already killed once. They won't hesitate to do it again. They separated at the outcrop. Vivian helping Feldman northeast toward the ranger station, while Ramsey circled back toward Pitchstone with Knox. She moved through the forest like her father had taught her slowly, deliberately, using terrain and shadow to mask her presence. It took her an hour to work her way back to the clearing. The search party had moved on, probably assuming anyone hiding would run away from the settlement rather than toward it. She could hear them in the distance, crashing through the undergrowth with the carelessness of people who weren't worried about being heard. The mine entrance was unguarded. They hadn't expected anyone to go inside. Ramsey stood at the opening, looking into the darkness. Knox whined softly, reluctant to enter. She didn't blame him. The mine exhaled cold air that smelled of earth and old secrets. She pulled out her flashlight, checked her pack one more time, then looked at Knox. "Stay here. Guard the entrance. I'll be back soon," he said, obedient but unhappy. She scratched his ears once, then turned and entered the mine, swallowed by darkness and the weight of the mountain above. Behind her. The forest continued its search, unaware that what they were looking for was now behind them, descending into the earth where her father's secrets waited. The mine was colder than Ramsey expected. Her flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness, illuminating rough-cut stone walls supported by ancient timber beams. The wood was surprisingly intact, preserved by the constant cool temperature and lack of moisture. Her boots crunched on loose gravel and rock fragments that had fallen from the ceiling over the decades. She moved carefully, testing each step before committing her weight. Mine collapses could happen without warning, especially in shafts this old. The air was stale but breathable, probably from the partially collapsed entrance, allowing some circulation. The main shaft descended at a gentle angle, wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Cart tracks were still visible in the floor, rusted rails that had once carried ore to the surface. Tool marks scarred the walls where miners had chipped away at the rock, searching for the vein. Criminal investigations spanning a century and a half. This wasn't just historical interest. This was explosive. She understood now why he'd kept it secret, why he'd spent decades making sure no one could find this place. He'd been waiting, perhaps, for the right moment to reveal it. Or maybe he'd simply been protecting it until someone trustworthy came along. Someone like her. Ramsey spread everything out on her father's old desk and began photographing each document with her phone. The coverage was spotty this far from town, but if she could get to higher ground, she might be able to upload the images to cloud storage. Digital backups, scattered and secure, that couldn't be destroyed by burning a single set of papers. She worked through the night, methodically documenting everything. Knox dozed by the wood stove, occasionally lifting his head when some sound outside caught his attention. But the forest remained quiet, holding its breath. By dawn, she had photographed every page, every map, every photograph. The originals went back into the ammunition box, which she sealed and hid in a space beneath the floorboards that her father had constructed years ago. He'd shown it to her once, making her promise to remember where it was. Another secret he'd shared. Another preparation for a day he'd known might come. She made coffee and stood on her porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Somewhere out there, Vivian was getting Feldman to safety and calling for help. Law enforcement would respond, but it would take time. The nearest sheriff's station was 40 miles away, and they'd need to organize a proper response before coming out here, which meant Ramsey had maybe 12 hours before official help arrived. 12 hours in which the corporation's security team would search for her and the documents with increasing desperation. She couldn't just hide and wait. They'd eventually find the cabin, and when they did, she'd be trapped. No, she needed to go to them. Needed to set terms, create a situation where their only option was to back down. It was risky, possibly stupid, but it was what her father would have done. She loaded her pack with supplies: water, food, first aid kit, rope, the handheld radio, flares. She also took something from the locked cabinet in her shed, a hunting rifle that had belonged to her father. She didn't want to use it, wasn't sure she could use it on another person. But having it might make the difference between being taken seriously and being ignored. Knox watched her preparations, understanding that something significant was happening. When she opened the cabin door, he was ready, alert, and focused. "Let's go have a conversation," she told him. The trail to Pitchstone was familiar now. She made good time, arriving at the settlement by mid-morning. The corporation's camp had grown 3 tents, portable equipment, a generator humming in the background. The search party had settled in for a longer operation. Ramsey circled the camp, observing from a distance. She counted 10 people, all men, all wearing similar tactical clothing that suggested professional security rather than corporate employees. 2 were armed with visible sidearms. The others probably had weapons concealed, and standing near the largest tent, reviewing maps on a portable table, was the man from the photographs. Older now, gray-haired and slightly stooped, but unmistakably the same person who'd once been copied on her father's reports. Gerald Sutherland, Regional Director of Cascade Mining's modern subsidiary, Cascadia Resource Development. A man whose grandfather had run the original Cascade mining company in the 1880s. A man who had every reason to want the historical documents. Destroyed. Ramsey watched him for a long time, studying his body language, the way he interacted with the security team. He was in charge, absolutely, but there was something desperate in his movements. This wasn't just about money or corporate reputation. This was personal. She made her decision. Stepping out from the tree line, she walked openly into the camp with her rifle slung across her back and her hands visible. Knox stayed at her side, calm but watchful. The security team reacted immediately, hands moving to weapons, forming a loose perimeter around her. But no one drew on her. They were professionals, and she hadn't presented a direct threat. Sutherland looked up from his maps and froze. For a moment, something like guilt flickered across his face. Then his expression hardened into corporate neutrality. "Miss Coyle," he said, "I'm glad you're safe. We've been worried about you." "Have you?" "Of course. These mountains are dangerous, especially for someone alone. When we heard there might be an injured hiker in the area, we organized this search party to help." "Is that what you're calling it?" Sutherland smiled, thin and cold. "What else would I call it? A cover story for a legal excavation on federal land." Ramsey gestured at the equipment around them. "Unless you're planning to file proper permits and environmental impact studies, we have every intention of following legal procedures. After you secure the site and remove any evidence of historical wrongdoing." The smile disappeared. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Your grandfather knew too. He was there when Pitchstone was destroyed." Ramsey took a step closer, ignoring the security team. "My father found the documents, the proof of what the Cascade Mining Company did. And you've spent the last 2 years trying to make sure no one else finds them." Sutherland was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, older, wearier. "Your father was a stubborn man. I tried to reason with him, tried to explain that those old grievances didn't matter anymore. The people involved are long dead. Why dig up the past? Because the past isn't dead. Your corporation is built on theft and murder. My corporation provides jobs, resources, economic development on land you stole. We own this land legally. Whatever happened in the 1880s is irrelevant to modern claims. Not when there's a continuous chain of wrongdoing. Not when the documents prove your grandfather personally ordered violence against settlers." Ramsey pulled out her phone, held it up. "I have photographs of everything. Every journal entry, every legal document, every piece of evidence my father preserved. And I've uploaded them to 3 different cloud storage accounts with instructions to release them publicly, if anything happens to me." It was a bluff she hadn't had. Signal to upload anything but. Sutherland didn't know that. His face went pale. "You're making a mistake. Am I? Because it seems like you're the one who made mistakes. Hiring Feldman to find this place, sending your security team after him when he backed out, and killing my father when he wouldn't cooperate. That was an accident, was it? Because I don't believe in convenient accidents anymore." Sutherland looked around at his security team, clearly weighing his options. Ramsey could see him calculating, considering whether he could afford to let her leave with that information. "Here's what's going to happen," she said before he could decide. "You're going to pack up this camp and leave. You're going to abandon any claims on this land. And you're going to issue a public statement acknowledging the historical crimes committed by the Cascade Mining Company. Or I release the documents immediately and spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows what your family did. Every news outlet, every historical society, every government agency that might care. I'll make it my mission to destroy everything you've built." Sutherland laughed, but it sounded forced. "You don't have that kind of reach." "Maybe not, but I know people who do." She thought of Vivian, of the network of wilderness stewards and environmental activists who'd spent decades protecting these mountains. And I'm betting they'd love to have a new cause to rally around. The standoff stretched. Around them, the forest was silent, waiting. Finally, Sutherland spoke. "Even if I wanted to comply, I can't. This project has investors' corporate oversight. I can't just walk away. Then prepare for the legal battle, because the authorities are already on their way. And when they get here, they're going to find me alive, unharmed, and very talkative." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Ramsey smiled. "Want to find out?" Sutherland stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something break behind his eyes. The calculation shifted from aggression to damage control. "What do you want?" He asked quietly. "I want you to leave. I want this land protected. And I want my father's name cleared." "Done. But the documents will be donated to the Oregon Historical Society, where they belong. Public record, accessible to anyone who wants to know the truth." Ramsey lowered her phone. "That's non-negotiable." Sutherland nodded slowly. "All right, you win." But his eyes promised that this wasn't over. The security team began breaking down, the camp within minutes of Sutherland's agreement. Ramsey watched from a distance, Knox at her side, making sure they followed through. But something felt wrong. The men moved too efficiently, too purposefully, without the reluctance she'd expected from people abandoning a profitable operation. They were planning something. She caught the glances between Sutherland and his lead security officer. The subtle hand signals that professionals use when they don't want to be overheard. Whatever agreement Sutherland had made, he was already working on ways around it. Ramsey backed slowly toward the tree line, keeping her movements casual, trying not to trigger a response. Knox sensed her tension and stayed close, body low, ready for trouble. She'd made it maybe 20 yards when Sutherland turned and looked directly at her. "Miss Coyle," he called out. "One more thing." She stopped, hand moving to the rifle slung across her back. "Those cloud storage accounts you mentioned," Sutherland continued, walking toward her. "I'm curious how you manage to upload files when there's no cell coverage in this area." "We checked. The nearest tower is 15 miles away. Our bluff had been called. I have satellite uplink." She tried, but even as she said it, she knew it sounded weak. Sutherland smiled. "Do you? Because our equipment shows no satellite transmissions from this area in the last 12 hours, which means those documents are still on your phone or hidden somewhere nearby." The security team had stopped packing. They were spreading out now, forming a loose circle around her position. "This doesn't have to be difficult," Sutherland said. "Give me the phone and tell me where the originals are hidden. In exchange, I'll let you walk away. You can even keep your story about your father. We'll issue a statement honoring his conservation work. Everyone wins, except the truth. The truth is complicated. My grandfather made mistakes, yes, but the people of Pitchstone were squatters on company land. They knew the risks when they refused to leave. What happened was tragic, but it was also legal within the context of the time. Murder is never legal. Murder requires proof, and you don't have any." Sutherland was closer now, maybe 10 feet away. Those documents show intimidation, yes. Property disputes, certainly. But actual murder? There's no confession, no eyewitness testimony that would hold up in modern court. Just the word of people who had every reason to lie to save their claim. Ramsey knew he was right about the legal technicalities. The documents were damning, but not conclusive. They'd create negative publicity, maybe trigger investigations, but they wouldn't necessarily result in criminal charges a century and a half later. But they would ruin his reputation. And clearly, that was enough to make him desperate. Last chance, Sutherland said. The phone and the location of the originals. No, he sighed, like he'd expected her answer but was disappointed anyway. Then he gestured to his security team. They moved fast, professional and coordinated. 2 came at her from the front, while another 2 circled to flank. Ramsey ran, Knox at her heels, sprinting for the thicker forest where superior numbers would matter less than knowledge of terrain. She made it 30 yards before someone tackled her from the side. She hit the ground hard, foam flying from her grip. Knox attacked immediately, teeth finding the security officer's arm, forcing him to release her. Ramsey scrambled to her feet and grabbed her phone, but 2 more officers were on her. She fought, using the self-defense training from her guiding days, but they were younger, stronger, and trained for exactly this kind of situation. One of them wrenched the rifle from her back while another pinned her arms. Knox was going crazy, attacking anyone who came near, but someone had grabbed him by the collar and was holding him back. "Don't hurt the dog," Sutherland called out. "Just secure it." They zip-tied Ramsey's wrists and took her phone. One of the officers scrolled through her photos, checking what she'd documented. "She got everything," he reported to Sutherland. "Full documentation of all the papers. Delete it all. Then destroy the phone. What about her?" Sutherland looked at Ramsey for a long moment. She saw him weighing options, considering outcomes, calculating risks. "The original plan," he said finally. "Take her to the mine. There's been a tragic accident, an inexperienced hiker going places she shouldn't have gone. The shaft collapsed. Very unfortunate." Ramsey's blood went cold. They were going to stage her death, bury her in the same mine where her father had hidden the truth. "People know I'm here," she said. "Vivian Price, Julian Feldman. When I don't come back, Vivian Price is a volunteer wilderness steward with no official authority. Julian Feldman is a fugitive who violated his contract and is facing legal action. Neither of them will be taken seriously." Sutherland turned away. "Take her." They dragged her toward the mine entrance, Knox barking frantically behind her. She struggled, trying to break free, but the zip ties were professional grade, and the men holding her knew what they were doing. At the mine entrance, Sutherland paused and pulled out an old emergency flare gun from his jacket, the same one she'd left on her porch. "You dropped this," he said, loading it. "We'll need it to trigger the collapse." They were going to seal her inside and bring down the shaft. No body would ever be found. Ramsey looked up at the sky, at the mountains her father had loved, and prepared herself for what came next. Then she heard it. The distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching fast from the north. The helicopter came in low over the trees. A search and rescue model with Forest Service markings. Sutherland and his security team looked up, momentarily frozen. Ramsey used the distraction to wrench free from the man holding her left arm, throwing her weight sideways and pulling him off balance. Knox broke free at the same moment, charging toward her. The security team was torn between controlling their prisoner and dealing with the approaching helicopter. In that moment of confusion, Ramsey dropped to her knees and rolled, making herself a harder target to grab. The helicopter touched down in the clearing, and 5 people emerged. 3 Forest Service Rangers in uniform, Vivian Price and Julian Feldman. Limping but mobile. "Federal officers," one of the Rangers called out, hand on his weapon. "Nobody move?" Sutherland recovered quickly, his expression shifting to professional concern. "Thank God you're here. This woman has been threatening my survey team. We had to restrain her for everyone's safety." The lead ranger, a woman in her 40s with silver at her temples, looked at the scene with practiced skepticism. "That's interesting, Mr. Sutherland, because we received a report that you were conducting illegal excavation on protected wilderness land." "A misunderstanding. We have permits." "No, you don't. We checked." The ranger gestured to her team. "Release her." One of the security officers cut Ramsey's zip ties. She stood, rubbing her wrists, and walked to where Knox waited for her. The dog pressed against her leg, shaking with residual adrenaline. Vivian came over, her expression grim but relieved. "You all right?" "I am now." The ranger was examining the camp, taking in the surveying equipment, the excavation tools, the portable generator. "This is way beyond recreational hiking, Mr. Sutherland. Want to explain what you're really doing here?" "As I said, we have authorization." "From whom?" "Because I've been the supervising ranger for this district for 12 years, and I've approved exactly 0 mining surveys in this area." She pulled out a tablet and showed it to him. "I also have a report from Miss Price detailing threats made against Mr. Feldman, along with his testimony about being hired under false pretenses and then abandoned when he tried to withdraw from the project." Sutherland's mask was slipping. "That man violated his contract. That man nearly died because your people chased him through the wilderness and left him injured." The ranger's voice was hard. "We're going to have a lot of questions about that." Ramsey spoke up. "There's more. He has documents that prove historical crimes committed by his corporation." "He was trying to destroy evidence." "What documents?" "They're hidden. But I have photographs." Ramsey looked at the security officer holding her phone. "On my phone, which your people confiscated." The ranger extended her hand to the security officer. "I'll take that." He looked at Sutherland, who gave the tiniest shake of his head. The officer didn't move. "That's obstruction," the ranger said, her voice dropping dangerously. "Hand it over, or you'll be spending tonight in federal custody while we sort this out." The security officer hesitated one more moment, then gave up the phone. The ranger scrolled through Ramsey's photos, her expression growing darker with each image. "These are historical documents, proving that the Cascade Mining Company terrorized settlers in the 1880s, potentially murdered several people, and illegally seized this land." Ramsey pointed at Sutherland. "His grandfather ordered the violence. He's been trying to hide that history ever since my father discovered it." "That's slander," Sutherland said, but he'd lost his confident tone. "Those documents are taken out of context. Then you'll have plenty of opportunity to explain the context to investigators." The ranger handed the phone back to Ramsey. "Where are the originals?" "Safe. I'll turn them over to the Oregon Historical Society once I'm certain they'll be protected." Sutherland made one last attempt. "This is a private corporate matter. Those documents are the property of the people who wrote them," Ramsey interrupted. "The settlers of Pitchstone, who were driven from their homes and wanted their story told. My father preserved that story. Now I'm making sure it gets heard." The ranger looked between them, assessing. "Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Sutherland, you and your team are being escorted off this land immediately. We'll be conducting a full investigation into your activities here, and you can expect charges related to illegal excavation, trespassing with commercial intent, and possibly assault and attempted kidnapping based on Ms. Coyle's testimony." "You can't." "I can, and I am. Ms. Coyle, you'll need to give a full statement. We'll also need access to those documents for the investigation." Ramsey nodded. "You'll have them." Sutherland looked at her one last time, and she saw something break in his expression. The desperation had turned to resignation. He'd lost, and he knew it. "My father spent 30 years protecting this place," Ramsey said quietly. "I'm going to make sure his work meant something." "Your father was a fool," Sutherland said bitterly. This could have been handled quietly, profitably, with no one getting hurt. Someone already got hurt. He did, Ramsey held his gaze. And now everyone's going to know why. The Forest Service rangers began processing the site, documenting everything, taking statements from the security team. Sutherland was led to the helicopter, his corporate authority meaningless in the face of federal law enforcement. Ramsey sat on a fallen log. Knox pressed against her and watched the sun move across the sky. Vivian sat beside her, not speaking, just present. After a while, Feldman limped over. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of this." "If I hadn't, you were used," Ramsey said. "We both were. But it's over now, is it?" She thought about her father's compass in her pocket, about the documents hidden beneath her cabin floor, about the truth that would finally be told. "Yes," she said. "It's over." 3 weeks later, Ramsey stood at her father's grave. It was a simple marker in the Pinewood Cemetery. Granite with his name and dates and the words Surveyor, Conservationist Guardian. She'd added the last word herself. After everything that had happened, the documents from Pitchstone were now in the Oregon Historical Society's archives, properly cataloged and preserved. The photographs she'd taken had been featured in newspapers across the state, sparking conversations about historical injustice and corporate responsibility. Cascadia Resource Development was facing multiple investigations, and Gerald Sutherland had resigned from his position. Julian Feldman had returned to teaching, but he'd written a detailed account of Pitchstone's history that would be published next year. He'd promised to donate half the proceeds to wilderness conservation in her father's name. Vivian had been officially recognized by the Forest Service for her role in protecting Pitchstone, and she'd recruited Ramsey to join the Wilderness Steward Program. It wasn't a commitment Ramsey had expected to make, but standing here now, she understood why her father had spent so much of his life in these mountains. Some things were worth protecting. Knox sat beside her, gray muzzle resting on his paws, patient and calm. He'd been getting extra treats lately, and she suspected he knew he'd earned them. "I understand now," she said to the gravestone. "Why you kept secrets, why you stayed vigilant. You weren't being paranoid or obsessive. You were waiting for the right moment." The wind moved through the cemetery, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. "I wish you told me," she continued. "Trusted me with what you knew. But I understand why you didn't. Some burdens you carry alone until you're sure they won't break the next person." She pulled out his compass, the brass warm from her pocket, and held it in her palm. The needle pointed north, steady and true. "Thank you," she said simply. The drive back to her cabin took an hour, winding through familiar forest roads. She'd been making this trip regularly now, checking on the cabin but also spending time in Pinewood, reconnecting with the community she'd left behind 2 years ago. Her cabin looked the same, solid, weathered, built to last. But it felt different now, less like a hiding place and more like a home base. Somewhere to return to between other responsibilities. Inside, she'd made some changes. Her father's desk now held her own work. Maps she was creating of the protected wilderness areas. Notes on trail conditions. Reports for the Forest Service. She'd taken his job, in a way, but made it her own. The ammunition box was gone, delivered to the Historical Society in a ceremony that had drawn surprising media attention. But she'd kept one item, the photograph of Pitchstone at its peak, showing families standing proudly in front of their homes. She'd framed it and hung it on her wall, a reminder of what her father had fought to preserve. Knox settled by the wood stove, which would need to be lit soon as evening approached. Ramsey made coffee and stood on her porch. Looking at the mountains dot, she thought about the people of Pitchstone, driven from their homes but determined to leave a record. She thought about her father, spending decades protecting that record. And she thought about herself, finally understanding the weight of legacy and the responsibility that came with knowing the truth. Her phone rang. The cabin now had a signal booster she'd installed. It was Vivian. "Hey," the older woman said. "Just wanted to check in. You settled?" "As settled as I ever am." "Good, because I have a proposition for you. There's another site, about 60 miles northeast. That might need attention. Historical markers suggest an old homestead, but someone's been asking questions at the land office." Ramsey smiled. "You think it's worth looking into?" "I think your father would have looked into it. And I think you've got his instincts now. When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. Early. Bring that dog of yours. We might need his nose." After they hung up, Ramsey stood on the porch a while longer, watching the light change as the sun descended toward the horizon. The forest was entering its evening transition, birds settling into roosts, deer emerging from their daytime hiding spots to graze. This was her life now. Not the isolation she'd sought 2 years ago, but something better. Purpose. She was still alone most of the time, still spent her days in the wilderness, but now her solitude had direction. She was carrying on her father's work, protecting places and stories that might otherwise be lost. She carved a small wooden marker that evening, working by lamplight with tools her father had taught her to use when she was young. Simple letters burned in the pine. Guardian of the Wild. With her father's initials beneath. At dawn, she hiked to the trailhead that led toward Pitchstone. The site was protected now, designated as a historical preserve, but not yet open to the public. That would take time, planning, careful management to preserve both the ruins and the story they told. She placed the marker at the trailhead, securing it firmly in the ground. Knox sniffed it approvingly, then looked at her with those knowing eyes. "Come on," she said. "We've got work to do." They walked back through the forest together, woman and dog, moving with the easy confidence of those who knew their place in the world. Above them, the mountains stood eternal and patient, keeping their secrets until someone worthy came along to protect them. Sometimes, the peace we seek in our later years isn't something we find lying still. Sometimes, it's something we protect with everything we have. Sometimes it's the fight itself that brings us home. Ramsey had found her peace. Not in isolation, but in purpose. Not in forgetting the past, but in making sure it was remembered. Her father would have understood. She hoped he was proud.